It's more about building relationships with people, and getting to know them, as a person, not just as a business. And I think it's best to go in if you're going to a networking meeting, don't go in with a feeling of, what can I sell, but how can I help people? Because nobody likes to be sold to, but
Sure.
everybody likes to be helped.
Starting or growing your business is hard work. But now you are listening to the Better Business Podcast with me, Steve Cook, and I'm going to try and make it a little easier on you. We on this podcast help you grow a better business with real advice from professionals, and today is no different. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Better Business Podcast. I am your host, Steve Cook, and on today's show, I have a very interesting episode for you. My guest name is Liz Drury, and she is a freelance voiceover artist that is based in the UK, and she works for clients around the globe. Some of the well-known brands that have used her voice include JCB, Booking.com, Nestle, Philips, and BMW, as well as many others. She works across a number of voiceover genres, including commercials, corporate videos, e-learning, telephone, and audio tours. Liz has a broadcast quality home studio, which means she can turn projects around really fast, and her clients describe her as a joy to work with. Liz also hosts a podcast called the Small Business Big Network Podcast. Liz, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for inviting me.
I've got one question to ask you that has been burning in my mind. And that question is, how in the world do you find yourself getting into the business of being a voiceover artist?
A lot of people ask me that question, I have to say. So the story kind of goes back to when I was a student. I was studying for a PhD in archaeological science at the University of Bradford in the UK. And part of my research was to look at these lumps of tar with human tooth impressions in that people had dubbed prehistoric chewing gum as a bit of a joke, really. And I did some analysis to find out what these things were made of. And I wrote an article about them for a sort of popular magazine called British Archaeology. And I explored why these bits of tar had got tooth impressions in. Were people chewing it to soften it up in order to use it as a glue to stick an arrowhead onto a shaft? Were they chewing it to clean their teeth? Were they chewing it to get high from it? All these possibilities. And I can only imagine it must have been a very slow news week when this article came out, because the press got hold of this story and it ran for about a fortnight. And I was in continual demand to do radio interviews. And the university had a little recording studio with an ISDN line, which meant it could connect to radio stations around the country. And I kept finding myself in this little booth talking to people at radio stations and thinking, wow, this is really good fun. I really enjoy being in front of a microphone. So that's kind of where it started. But I didn't go immediately into voiceover. I worked at a local cable TV station for a while and did some voiceover work as part of my job there. Left there to have my kids, intending to go back. And while I was off, the business got sold. So there was no job to go back to. And I ended up doing something completely different. And then at the end of 2011, my husband, who's in the chemical industry, was asked to go and work in the States for a couple of years. So we moved out to Baltimore in Maryland, and he was going to work and the kids were going to school. And so I was at a bit of a loose end. And I used the opportunity to train, and I trained in voiceover while we lived in the States with a great company called Edge Studio, who are based largely in New York, but had a satellite studio in Washington, DC, which is about 40 minutes from where we were living. So I did my training with them, made my first professional demos with them, and started my business while we were living in America, and then brought it back home with me.
So let me ask you this. The people that used you in the States, I can only imagine being a American and listening to you. Did they use you for a interesting voice, or why? I think it's the coolest accent. To me, of course, over there, it's probably very normal for people to hear. But do people in the United States use you for a outsider's voice or something like that?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, one of my very early clients I still work for today, because of course with the internet now it doesn't really matter where you're based.
Sure.
And so he's based in Maryland and has a home recording studio, and he does a lot of corporate videos, e-learning, health and safety, and he will sometimes get asked specifically for a British accent for his projects.
Gotcha.
So I did some work for him, and my understanding is that the Americans hear the British accent as being sophisticated. And so if the client is looking for a sophisticated sound for their product or service, they might ask for a British accent.
That's so crazy, and that's the way I view it too, it's almost like, "Oh, they're smarter than me, I don't know, they have a British accent." So, that's incredible, so as far as the business now, how do maybe, not only you, but how would someone get started in maybe not only voiceover, but some sort of freelance work? How did you get started, or how would someone get started in that work? It sounded like you kind of teamed up with another company to do that. Is that, looking back, was that the best thing that you did, or is there another avenue that you would maybe recommend now?
So I was really lucky when I started out. So I had been studying at the local community college. I'd done some acting courses and some singing courses, and then I saw a course advertised through my local Parks and Rec, actually, which is called Acting for the Camera. And I thought it'll be fun to get back in front of a camera again, and went along. And the tutor, she was a local actress, and she'd done theatre, she'd done film, she'd done a bit of everything, but including voiceover work. And so she was sort of my first mentor, really, and
Okay.
kind of pointed me in the right direction when I first got started. And she told me about some websites for freelance voiceover artists where you can have a profile and clients will post jobs online and you can audition for them. And so that's kind of how I started, but it's not really how I would recommend people get started anymore, because these freelance websites are now so saturated.
Yeah,
This was kind of 8 years ago, and and particularly since last year and the pandemic, so many more people have started,
that's exactly right.
businesses like mine where they can work from home, and those platforms are really, really difficult, I think, to get work on now. Um, and so the way I like to try and get work is to try and create more of a personal relationship with the people that you want to work with. And there are two ways that I do this. One is by emailing, outreach through either email or LinkedIn to people that I would like to work with, and you try and start a conversation, not to sell them anything, but to get to know them in the first place. And the sales comes sort of way down the line. And the other way is by business networking. I've kind of always done that for my business from the start, really. And it's an opportunity to, particularly if you network locally, is to get to know other people who are in your area. And it's not necessarily about working with them, but people in their network, because once they get to know you, like you, trust you, that's the point where they're going to then recommend you to people if they hear of somebody who wants your services. So I'm a big advocate of networking.
So let me ask you this, Liz. If someone, let's say they want to start writing, or they want to start a voiceover, they want to start something that is very popular on a a business like Upwork or something like that,
Mhm.
Fiverr. Um, would you recommend? Why do you recommend starting your own versus just getting jobs through there? Is there a reason why you recommend that?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. I mean, often the online marketplaces don't pay particularly well. Certainly for voiceover, a lot of them pay Fiverr, so it's certainly sort of well below the market value. Um, but also a lot of these platforms don't let you build a relationship with the end client, because, of course, they don't want anyone to move off their platform.
Yes.
So, they're always there as the middleman, and you don't have that opportunity to interact with your client,
So
which
you're
makes it
just in this
difficult.
perpetual cycle of
Mm.
having to get new customers over and over and over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even if the client that you've worked for before wants to use you again, they've got to go back through the platform and find you all over again. Understand from a client's point of view that can be quite difficult to do. Um, and so I think it's just much better if you can get rid of that
Do
and
you
go
think
directly to your clients.
do you think people do that because it's just easier to get started doing
Yes.
that? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is easy, to register on these marketplaces and to start auditioning for jobs. It's much more difficult to reach out to people personally because it means you've got to do a bit of research and find out, what they do,
It's
and
hard work.
yeah, that's right. So in a way, the marketplaces, those online marketplaces, have kind of done that for you. So it's full of people that want your service, but it's also full of hundreds of people doing the same thing as you, all trying to get that one job.
Gotcha. So you had mentioned, a way to start this process of building this, this business that you want to get started instead of going with a commodity, traded
Mhm.
platform or something like that. Build your own business, build your own brand. And what you had mentioned before is that you think that networking is a great way to do that.
Mm.
I think networking is just this kind of word that a lot of people have in their mind. At least it
Yeah.
is for me at some points. Because if you've ever been to like a networking event or a networking website, it's just everyone's trying to sell everything to everyone. What does obviously it's been you've had success with it because you had mentioned it. What does networking mean to you?
Definitely not selling. It's more about building relationships with people, and getting to know them, as a person, not just as a business. And I think it's best to go in if you're going to a networking meeting, don't go in with a feeling of, what can I sell, but how can I help people? Because nobody likes to be sold to, but
Sure.
everybody likes to be helped. And so, yeah, when you're having a conversation with somebody, listen out for what they might need, and it might be not what you've got, but there might be somebody in your network you can put them in touch with. And it's always great when you can do that. Or you meet somebody who needs something that one of your contacts can do, and you can put those two people together because then you've helped two people, and then those two people kind of owe you a favor.
Think
And so
highly
the
of you.
next time,
Yeah.
yeah, and next time they hear of somebody wanting your service, guess who they're going to think of? You're going to be front of mind because you've helped them out in the past. And I think, it's very much what goes around comes around when it comes to networking. And like you said, a lot of people think, "Oh, networking, oh, do I really have to do that?" And I think, it has had a bit of a bad reputation in the past, but I think a lot of people are now waking up to the fact that going in with a mindset of selling just never works. But if you go in trying to help people, everybody likes that.
I think a lot of successful people, at least for me, and not saying I'm successful, but at least for me, my personality is if somebody helps me, line up a mutual person that is can become a client for me or helps me get somebody's number or helps me get somebody's email, at least for me, that makes me that they owe you one deal that you had talked about. That gives me like an anxious, I almost want to get them paid back as soon as that happens. I'm like, I got to get this off. I don't like owing people favors or anything like that. So if somebody truly helps you and doesn't ask for anything in return, for me it's like, man, I've got to get them fixed up on something. So that is a great point. I think that's something that a lot of people would find successful in doing that. So let's say that somebody is starting out and they want to grow this brand. You've convinced them by saying, don't go through a platform like that. Start your own brand, start your own, personal brand that you can start
Mhm.
building. And you've convinced them of that. But let's be honest, in a voiceover environment, or say you're writing or something like that, a lot of times those are big businesses that you're needing to sell to. These can be CEOs of large companies that you're needing to get approval from or something like that. How Let's take a step back from the networking. How do you even find these people? How do you know the right person to talk to? Let's say you're a writer and you need to talk to somebody at a large corporation. You don't even know who you need to talk to. How do you find those people?
Do you know, I think we're really lucky these days because we have the internet. We have Google, we have LinkedIn, and it's so much easier now than it would have been 20, 30 years ago to find out who those people are, because 9 times out of 10 they're on LinkedIn or Facebook or something. Um, so it just requires a bit of research and, going into LinkedIn and looking up. I don't know, you could search for people by their job title. If you know the job title of the person who's likely to hire you, stick that into LinkedIn and, you can do it, You can set the parameters so that it's searching in your local area, and it will bring up those people with the right job title in the area, and you can then go look them up and connect with them. Or you might not want to do that straight away. You might want to follow them for a while and see what kind of things they post, comment on their posts, and just make yourself visible to them, and then perhaps connect with them and say, I really like what you've been writing on LinkedIn, and I'm so and so, and I do this, and just I'm looking to grow my network. Can I connect with you?
Glad to know you.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and most people will. I think it's always worthwhile. You're sending a note when you connect with somebody, not just randomly connecting, because then they're thinking, well, why is this person interested in me?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Tell me about one of the, you've some of these people that you had put in your introduction. They're some pretty heavy hitters. What is maybe one of the most popular or exciting projects that you've ever gotten to work on, that you've worked on, and how did you get that job?
So I've worked on all sorts of different things, and as you said at the beginning, for some big names, it's quite rare that I work directly with the end client. In those cases, there tends to be somebody in the middle, a production company, let's say. So I do try and connect with lots of production companies, and training companies that might be producing e-learning courses for various big corporations. So that tends to be how those kind of jobs come about. But one of my favourite jobs that I've done, not for a big corporate at all, it's for a local farm park for children. And a couple of years ago, they were putting together their kind of Christmas special, and they got in touch with me. And the way that I met this person was, both of us were up for an award at a local business awards ceremony, and we were sitting next to each other at the table, and we got talking, and swapped information. So I knew that he was from the farm park, and he knew that I was a voiceover artist. And yeah, he got in touch with me a few months later and said, "We're getting ready for Christmas, and we need somebody to be the voice of the train that takes the children to see Santa." One of my favourite jobs ever, and came about through networking.
Not a flattering job physically, I guess, because he was saying you needed to be a train, huh? But it was exciting for you, anyways, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
So tell me, you had mentioned the production studio. Is that your target? What is your target client? What's a great client for you? Are production people, are they the main people you're reaching out to?
Yeah, so there's a few different kinds of businesses that are a good fit for me. So yes, video production companies, because they might want voiceover for the projects they're creating for their clients, but also telecoms companies, because I do a lot of voicemail greetings and on hold messages for all kinds of businesses. And the telecoms companies tend not to do that in house when they're installing a phone system, so that they can outsource that part of the work to me. Marketing agencies are sometimes looking for voiceover artists for their clients. Training providers who are creating online courses and would like professional narration, they are good for me. And then things like, I do some what's called voice of God announcing, which is that disembodied voice that you hear at maybe at the theatre or at a conference, telling you to take your seats or who's won the next award. There hasn't been too much of that over the last year, funnily enough.
Sure.
So events companies might use me for that. And then finally, small museums or art galleries that might be looking for audio tours, and maybe can't afford to go through a big company that would provide all the hardware, you carry around with you, because nowadays you can build something on a mobile phone app so people can download it themselves, and so the museum or gallery can put that together themselves. So I've done a few of those. So yeah, various different people are a good fit for me.
Let's say someone wants to hire you in America, and they're looking for someone with that accent like you have. If
Mhm.
it were me, do you play up your accent, or do you change your voice any, or is it just, hey, you get my natural voice and that's it in every single thing you do, or do people request different things from you?
So I tend not to do different accents as such. Yeah, that's a question I often get asked by people. Oh, do you do lots of different accents? No, not really. Um, it tends to be these days, if somebody wants an accent, then they want it to be genuine. And, I see a lot of auditions coming through saying, we want a British accent for this. Please, no Americans putting on a British accent. We can tell. Don't do it. Um, and, and vice versa. They want an American
Guilty.
accent. No, 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 no Brits putting on the American accent. Yeah, they want the real thing. But I do change my tone, I suppose. So you're depending on who the audience is of what it is I'm recording. The client will say this needs to be really serious. You're talking to doctors here who really know their stuff, or it might be you're talking to children, so you need to be a bit more upbeat and happy, or can you sound like the girl next door? So it's my accent, my voice, but I will change the tone. And usually, clients will come up with some adjectives to describe how they want that read to be.
Gotcha. That's really interesting. Let's say for me, freelancing, it seems like that is one of the most common side jobs or side hustles, whatever you want to call
Mhm,
it. Let's say someone is freelancing right now, but they have a what's called a day-to-day job or something like
mhm.
that. What would be your best, pitch for them, or would you encourage them to go in full time on their freelancing job? Do you think that people should own their own business and go for it if they do enjoy their freelancing, if they're doing it as a side job, or do you think that perhaps freelancing is a great side income and you should not do that?
I think both things are valid, and I started doing the voiceover on a part-time basis. Well, that's not quite true. I started it in the States when I didn't have a job, but I was still building the business, and it wasn't a full-time career at that
And
point
were
when I
you
came
staying at
home.
home with your kids at that time, or is that what you had said?
Yeah, they
Okay.
were at elementary school when we were when we was in the States. And when we came home, I actually had a job to go back to, which had been kept open for me, and I was working 15 hours a week for my employer, and the rest of the time I was building my business. So I was doing it on a part-time basis, and it did get to the point where I was having to work late in the evening or early in the morning before I went to work to get everything done. So it was getting to the point where I was struggling to do both things. And actually, at that time, my role at my employer was made redundant anyway. So
Uh-huh.
the decision was kind of made for me. But I was glad to go, and I thought, this is actually the kick up the backside I need to go and do this full time and do it properly. So the timing couldn't have been more perfect, really. So I think, everybody's situation is different, and you can certainly be a part-time voiceover artist or a full-time voiceover artist. But I think eventually, if you are wanting to grow your business, you will get to a point where it's difficult to do both things.
In your opinion, let's say somebody has this desire to do some sort of work that could be freelancing. Maybe it's voiceover, maybe it's writing, maybe it's odd jobs on the side, a virtual assistant or something like that.
Mhm.
And they're not even doing any of that on the side right now, but they do have aspirations of doing that. They find it interesting or fun. In your opinion, do you think that someone should, maybe save up a little bit of money and just jump full time into it? Or do you think the path that you took, for instance, building up that business kind of slowly over time was a great way to do it? What's your opinion?
Yeah, I think building it slowly was certainly the way, the right way for me to go about it. When I actually decided when we moved back to the UK, so I had a job to go back to, as I said, it'd been kept open for me, and I thought, I'm going to go back for a year, and I know that I want to do voiceover, and I do want to do it full time eventually. So I will go back to my job for a year, make sure I've got a bit of a bit of cushion, a bit of money in the bank, and then I will have my notice in and I will go full time. And I didn't, because I actually really enjoyed my job, and I was working at a college. I was getting to interact with the students, and I really loved it. And so I actually stayed for 3 years, and as I say, they eventually made my role redundant. Um, but, it was nice to have that guaranteed income every month, because the freelance work could be, could be anything.
Yeah.
It's never guaranteed. So it was nice to know that I was gonna have some money at the end of the month, from my employer, if I didn't earn much from the voiceover work.
Liz, what is something that let's take from that time that you started, you jumped into this full time. What is something that you originally thought or had an opinion on that since that time and looking at yourself now, you have actually changed your mind on?
So when I first started out, I thought that getting an agent would be the be all and end all. I thought, when I get myself an agent, I will have made it in voiceover and I'll be getting work from my agent. That's just not the case. So I do have agents now, and I don't get very much from them. They have a lot of other people on their books, and the thing is that an agent, of course, is not working just for you. They're working for everyone on their books, whereas you are working just for you. So you can't rely on work coming from an agency because you won't eat.
Yeah.
So you still have to go out there and market yourself and do the hustle and get the jobs in yourself. And having an agent is very nice. It's kind of the cherry on top, I suppose, but it's not what I thought it was going to be.
I'm obsessed with business kind of documentaries or stories of how businesses got started, and I love listening to. There's a podcast called "How I Built This." I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a very
Oh no.
very popular podcast about it's just interviews founders of typically pretty large companies,
Mm,
and I've been obsessed with those from a long time ago. And one thing that I have noticed, a very common theme in a lot of those, is at some point they have this huge, you could call it a break, or they have this huge moment where they get asked to, in the United States, the Oprah Winfrey show or whatever, they get asked to be on the news, and they think, this is it, this is my moment. And they have this happen, and it's this huge opportunity, and they're like, it's going to change, I'm going to have to hire 100 employees after this or whatever it might be. And that happens, and it's not as big of a deal as they thought. It does
yeah.
bump your business a little bit or whatever it might be, but I think that that is something that no matter how many times you hear it, I've been guilty of this. It's like, after this happens, here I go, I'm on my way.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are suspect to that. Have you ever had any opportunities or things like that you've been asked to be on a certain show or anything like that you were like, this is my big moment?
Well, yes, certainly the first time that I did his job for an agent, and I had to go down to London to do it, and it was recorded in a very nice posh Soho studio. And I thought, great, now I've done this once, I'm going to get asked back to do it loads of times. No, didn't
Yeah.
happen.
So tell me some practical advice. Now, of course, keep it maybe relative for people that are not professional voiceover artists.
Mhm.
What is some practical advice? I see your studio here. If you're not watching the video, you can. She has a incredible amount of what you could call what do you call it, eggshell? You know,
Yeah,
soft
the
soft
foam, the
soft
foam.
foam everywhere, all surrounding her. What is some common themes that you see people doing that you're like, man, please don't do this? That people could really improve the quality of their audio if they're recording, small commercials or small things for their business or something like that. What's something they could do to improve their audio?
Yeah, so I think a mistake that a lot of people make, when they think, "Okay, I want to improve my audio, I'll go and buy an expensive microphone." There is no point having an expensive microphone unless you have an environment like I'm sitting in to record in, because the more expensive the microphone, the more background noise it's going to pick up. So this microphone here, if I just put that onto my desk, and tried to record in my office, it would sound appalling, even
It
though I've
would
spent a
almost be
small
worse,
fortune.
it sounds like.
Exactly,
Yeah. Okay.
exactly. It would. So that's a mistake that people make. So you don't need to spend masses of money on a microphone unless you're going down the audio route like myself. You want to be a voiceover artist, but you do need to try and make your environment as quiet as it can be. And you want to record in a room where there aren't too many hard surfaces. So something like a bedroom would be ideal because you've got the curtains or drapes, as you guys say, and you've got the bedding, and you've got maybe carpet, and you've got cushions, and all that will help to absorb the sound. The worst places of recording are like kitchens and bathrooms where there's lots of hard surfaces, because the sound is going to bounce off those hard surfaces and it's just going to sound really echoey in the recording. And a way that you can kind of dampen the sound even more is to build what's known in the industry as a pillow fort. So you can set up a load of pillows or cushions around your microphone, and then kind of speak at it, and that will help sort of deaden the sound as well, and that will sound much better than having it just in the middle of the room and talking into it.
So if you see my next few videos coming from like the floor of my closet like this, you'll know exactly why I'm doing that now.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, Liz. If somebody, this is kind of the final question that I like to ask everybody, and typically it's something that we've talked about through the episode or whatever it might be, but let's say you had to take a step back and boil everything down to one piece of advice for somebody that is maybe they've already started a business and they're feeling kind of stuck or plateaued, or maybe they are just starting out a business and you had to give them one piece of advice to better their business. What would that be?
I think it's to remember that it doesn't matter how great your product or service is, nobody's going to buy from you unless they know about you. And you've got to be prepared to put yourself out there and do your own marketing because no one else is going to do that for you. And yeah, whether you're using social media or you're using business networking or you're doing cold email outreach, or you probably need to be doing all of those things. I certainly do all of those things. You've got to be consistent with it. You've got to keep it up because, the minute you get a job, you might take your eye off the marketing ball, and once you've done that job, you haven't got anything else coming in. So you've always got to keep going with that marketing game. And if people don't know about you, they're not going to buy from you.
Do you think why a lot of people don't reach out and don't do those cold things is from a fear of looking silly?
Yeah, fear of rejection, and I think we all have that. I mean, I'm not a great fan of cold calling. I don't like to be cold called myself, so why would anybody want me to cold call them? But cold emailing, I think, is a much sort of gentler approach, and I think it's a useful something very useful to remember is that people will often not respond to the first email. So it's no good sending one and thinking, oh, I didn't get a reply, they didn't like me. Because how many emails do we get a day? And, this happens to me. Something will come in and I'll think, oh, that's interesting. I'll go back and respond to that later. 40 more emails come in and I've forgotten about it. If that person doesn't come back to me and say, oh, did you get my email? And I think, oh, yeah, I meant to respond to that. So that happens with my emails that I'm sending out as well. And so, I use a system where I will send an initial email, but I will always set several follow-ups to go, a month after, maybe a month after that. And it's surprising how many people do come back to you sort of 3, 4, even 5 emails down the line and say, thanks for being persistent. We are interested. We've just been really busy. And yes, we'd like to either use you or add you to our database or, please just keep in touch.
That's incredible advice. Liz, thank you so much for being on. If you do like what Liz is saying and you are interested in more of what she's doing, again, she has the Small Business Big Network podcast, and she will be able to be found there or anywhere online. She has her own website and has quite a bit of stuff on that. Liz, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Better Business Podcast with me, your host, Steve Cook. Starting or growing a business is hard work, so I hope that today's advice made it just a little bit easier for you. We'll be sharing more about this exact topic all this week on my social platforms. You can find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, or if you would like to get a personalized blog post from me on this topic, you can join my email list and I will send you an email once a week. You can check the show notes to subscribe to that or find me on my website, whatever's easier for you. Now get out there and go grow a better business with this advice from today's Real Pros. Thank you for listening.